How to build a solid emergency fund that works for you. Are you constantly worried about unexpected expenses popping up and derailing your financial goals? Do you feel like every time you start to save, something comes up that forces you to dip into those savings? It's time to build a solid emergency fund that works for you. In this blog post, we'll share tips and strategies for creating an emergency fund that will help protect your finances and give you peace of mind. Whether it's an unexpected car repair or a medical emergency, having money set aside can make all the difference. So let's dive in and learn how to build an emergency fund that can weather any storm. Why you need an emergency fund. If you're like most people, you probably don't have much money saved up in case of an emergency. In fact, according to a recent survey, nearly 60% of Americans have less than $1,000 in savings. This can leave you in a difficult situation if you suddenly lose your job, have a medical emergency, or face any other unexpected financial challenges. An emergency fund can help you cover these unexpected costs and give you peace of mind knowing that you have a cushion to fall back on. Here are some other reasons why you need an emergency fund. 1. Unexpected expenses. As we mentioned before, life is full of surprises. No matter how well you budget, there will always be unexpected expenses that come up. Having an emergency fund can help you cover these costs without having to put them on a credit card or take out a loan. 2. Job loss. If you suddenly lose your job, your emergency fund can help keep you afloat until you find another one. It can cover your living expenses and allow you to focus on your job search without worrying about how you're going to pay the bills. 3. Medical emergencies. Medical emergencies can be expensive, especially if they're not covered by insurance. An emergency fund can help pay for things like doctor's visits, prescriptions, and hospital stays. 4. Home repairs. Unexpected home repairs can be costly, but they're often necessary to keep your home safe. How much money should you have in your emergency fund? Most financial experts recommend having an emergency fund that covers 3 to 6 months of living expenses. However, the amount of money you should have in your emergency fund depends on a variety of factors, including your income, job security, and family situation. If you're a single person with a steady income and no dependents, you may be able to get by with a smaller emergency fund. On the other hand, if you have a family or are self-employed, you'll need a larger cushion to cover unexpected expenses. No matter how much money you have in your emergency fund, it's important to make sure that the funds are easily accessible and can be quickly accessed in case of an emergency. One way to do this is to keep the money in a savings account that can be easily linked to your checking account. That way, you can transfer funds quickly if you need to. In addition, it's important to review your emergency fund regularly and make sure that it's still adequate for your needs. As your income or financial situation changes, so should the amount of money you have set aside for emergencies. Where to keep your emergency fund? Your emergency fund should be kept in a safe, accessible place. A savings account at a bank or credit union is a good option, as is a money market account. You can also keep your emergency fund in a short-term bond fund or a high-yield savings account. Whatever type of account you choose, make sure it's FDIC insured or NCUA insured up to the maximum amount allowed. This insurance protects your money if the financial institution goes out of business. How to build your emergency fund. Assuming you don't have an emergency fund, start by saving $1,000 as your starter emergency fund. Once you have saved up your initial $1,000 emergency fund, you can begin working on saving 3 to 6 months of living expenses. Begin by evaluating your monthly expenses to get a better understanding of how much you will need to save. After you have calculated your monthly expenses, set a savings goal and timeframe to save this amount of money. Begin contributing to this goal each month until you reach your target savings goal. If you already have an emergency fund, great job. Now that you have an emergency fund in place, you can focus on growing this account. One way to grow your emergency fund is to contribute additional funds each month. Another way to grow your account is to invest the money in a high-yield savings account or short-term bonds so it can earn interest. Keep in mind that your ultimate goal is to maintain 3 to 6 months of living expenses in this account, so you may need to increase your savings goal as your cost of living increases. Using your emergency fund. When you have an emergency fund, you can cover unexpected expenses without going into debt. That's why it's important to 1. It can help you avoid high-interest debt and protect your credit score. Building an emergency fund is a process. You don't need to save up $1,000 overnight. Start small and increase your savings over time. The goal is to have enough money saved so that you can cover 3 to 6 months of living expenses. Here are some tips for using your emergency fund. 1. Cover unexpected expenses. Unexpected expenses can include car repairs, medical bills, or home repairs. If you have an emergency fund, you can use it to cover these costs without going into debt. 2. Avoid high-interest debt. If you don't have an emergency fund and you need to borrow money to cover unexpected expenses, you may be charged high interest rates on the loan. An emergency fund can help you avoid this type of debt. 3. Protect your credit score. If you use credit cards to pay for unexpected expenses, your credit score may be negatively affected. An emergency fund can help you avoid this by allowing you to pay for expenses with cash instead of credit. When to dip into your emergency fund. The emergency fund is there for a reason: emergencies. But what exactly constitutes an emergency? Here are a few examples. You lose your job and need money to live on while you search for a new one. You have a medical emergency that isn't covered by insurance. Your car breaks down and you need to get it repaired. Your house needs major repairs. Basically, if something unexpected happens and you need money to cover it, that's when you dip into your emergency fund. Of course, every situation is different, so use your best judgment. And if you're ever unsure, it's always better to err on the side of caution and dip into your fund sooner rather than later. Conclusion: building an emergency fund is a critical step for any individual or family to take. It's important to have the right strategy in place so you can ensure that you will be financially secure no matter what life brings your way. With careful planning and dedication, it is possible to create a solid emergency fund that will provide security and peace of mind should the worst happen. By following these tips, establishing an emergency fund doesn't have to be intimidating. It can be an achievable goal.